Welcome back to Calculated Risk. I am Tyler Shoemaker, joined as always by Kelly Ford. Another weekend in the books. We're going to take a look at the teams that our models upgraded and downgraded the most after week 2. Might be some surprises. I know we both have gotten yelled at on Twitter about Alabama still being ahead of Texas, and the song goes on as always. This is ratings, not rankings, so it's predictive. Anyway, Kelly, how's it going? What stuck out to you this weekend?
Things are going well, man. Yeah, week 2 in the books. It's crazy. It's already flying by. And yes, we've heard about it from fans. I've been told the model is trash. My analytics got blown up. It's broken. I mean, you name it. People told me because I have Alabama power rated better than Texas right now. I clapped back at a couple, but I said, you know what? That's enough for me. I'm moving on with my day, and we'll go from there. But yeah, man, things are going well, and we know this is going to happen. Anytime you have a big game with two high-profile teams, when the underdog wins, especially early in the year, it's likely, I mean, more likely than not, if the gap was significant coming in, that the team that just lost is going to remain power rated higher than the team that won. Clemson and Duke, we saw that there too. Now, people didn't get as upset with that one because it wasn't Alabama, Texas. But same thing.
Yeah.
When you have these upset, I mean, Baylor, I had Baylor power rated better than Texas State after they lost to them, right? Anytime there's an upset, unless the teams were very, very close coming in or you're very late in the year, yeah, you're going to have that power rating kind of nuance, and it's a rating, not a ranking, as you talked about, Tyler. But yeah, man, it was a fun week. It was exciting. A lot of things that I feel like we expected, and then all of a sudden, like at least at the top, and then all of a sudden, Bama loses, everybody loses their mind. But we had a lot of changes kind of lower down in the ratings. I know we're going to get to that.
Yeah, we did. And just to put a bow on the Alabama thing, I mean, you and I both, if I recall correctly, we both projected Alabama to win by double digits in that game or close to it. I know I did. So yeah, I mean, you're not going to change a whole rate. Rating's not going to swing 2 touchdowns after one game. In a 10-point win. Where I don't think Texas was great. I think it was more about Alabama being pretty mediocre in that game than Texas being great. At least so my eyes told me, and the numbers seem to back that up. But let's get to the teams that you and I upgraded the most after this week. And Kelly's got the graphics up here on YouTube, so I'll run through mine real quick and let him run through his. So I think I've got like a top 11 or 12 here because there was a tie there at the bottom, so I wanted to make sure we got everybody in there. But I've got Colorado, which I am being more aggressive with their formula, specifically, just because of the roster turnover and everything we've talked about. I am being more aggressive with Colorado at this point. So they were my most upgraded team, followed by Northwestern, who won 38-7 over UTEP, who made this list last week for me. Then Rutgers again. So the bottom of the Big Ten, taking a little step up. Hawaii, San Jose State, Georgia State, Ole Miss, New Mexico State in a loss. Sam Houston, Toledo, and Utah State for me.
Tyler, let me ask before I get into mine. What do you now have Colorado power rated from a ranking standpoint? Where are they ranked in your power ratings? Do you have that?
Ranking, they are 41.
Okay, yeah. So you have been a little bit more aggressive with them. I have them now up to number 56, which is still really good considering they started at I think number 98 for me or something like that.
Yeah.
So they've come up a long way. They were in my top, 2 or 3 biggest movers last week, and now they're in my top 5 biggest movers this week. For me, Tyler, it was all about the Mountain West. Apparently this week for the movers, my top 3 movers all come from the Mountain West. I have Utah State up 4.9 points, but as I talked about last week, the biggest disconnect, the biggest kind of rough edge that you have in a power rating world is from week 1 to week 2, when you first introduced that in-season data. Because if anyone remembers from last week, Oklahoma was my biggest riser a week ago, and they were up 6.9 points per game. This week, Utah State, my biggest riser, up 4.9. So 2 full points less of movement for the team that jumped the highest in my power ratings. Utah State up 20 spots in the rankings too, so that they were also a very large mover in the rankings, but it's the rating move that's more informative. But for me, Utah State up 4.9, San Jose State up 4.7, New Mexico up 4.6. And then I also, to round out my top 10 movers, Toledo, there's Colorado, Florida State up 4 points yet again. Tyler, I now have Florida State power rated number 3 in the entire country. It is just remarkable how strong this Florida State team has been in their first 2 games so far. Texas, that big win over Alabama. Yes, they are up 4 points for me. They are now power rated number 6, which is where I had them 2 weeks ago. I had them number 6 going into week 1. Coming out of week 1, I dropped to number 12. Now they are back up to number 6. Northwestern up for me. Miami of Florida up for me, and Louisville as well up for me. That rounds out my top 10 biggest movers. Louisville up 3.5 points though. So again, last week, my top 10, they all moved, I think, like 4.5 points or more. The movement is going to level out. It's going, water's going to find its level, and we're still going to get big movers when you have unexpected results. For example, Utah State, who put a 78-28 win on FCS Idaho State. Now, yes, it's FCS Idaho State, but my numbers projected Utah State to win that by 31. They won it by 50. So yeah, you're going to get a little bit of a bump here, even though your opponent wasn't very good at all. So we're leveling out, but we're still going to get movement week in, week out. The Mountain West, big winners for me in terms of the power ratings this week.
Yep, and Miami was like next on my list, so I'm right there in agreement on them as well.
It's a good win for the Hurricanes, man. I like beating Texas A&M. They were at home, I know, but my numbers like A&M. I want to say by 2. Give me 1 second, I will find it. My numbers had A&M, by 2. So I know Vegas had it by like 3.5, maybe 4, something like that.
And I had it 4 as well.
Yep. So again, we expected a close game, but man, Miami looked good in that game, and they now find themselves near the top of my most deserving rankings, which I'll reveal on Monday this week.
Yeah, they moved up to number 19 in my rankings, so that was a great win for them. In terms of just other things here that stuck out, I mean, Northwestern, I think everyone had kind of left them for dead. I upgraded them a touchdown after that because I had it projected like UTEP minus 0.5 point, and they blew them out. So, they got rewarded for that. They're still ranked 88th for me though. Rutgers on the rise. They're number 61 for me now. And they play Virginia Tech this week, and there's a decent chance I'm gonna bet on Rutgers minus I think the line's 4 on that game. I have a Virginia Tech season win total bet under 5. And if Rutgers does indeed win that game, like I don't see anywhere where that doesn't cash. So, be rooting for the Scarlet Knights for me this weekend. Ole Miss, they continue to look good. The final score, I think, was a little bit misleading with Tulane as far as how that game actually played out. And of course, Michael Pratt, the quarterback, didn't play for Tulane, but I thought Tulane looked good. Ole Miss looked great as well. I mean, they put it away when they had to. New Mexico State, they continue to find themselves on this list. They lost, but their game grade for the loss this week was a minus 0.6. So like a 0.5 point worse than what the average FBS team would have been expected to do. And when you're rated as lowly as New Mexico State is, if you perform like a team that's a 0.5 point below average, that's an upgrade. So that's how they ended up on this list, despite losing.
I love how what you just said is perfect. It's a great way to summarize, because people think, well, you lost, you have to go down. That's not true. But also you performed worse than the average team. Yes, but if you were already farther below that coming in, it's actually a net positive. So that's what I try to tell people. It's all relative. Everything that we're doing with power rating is relative. The quote average FBS team, that's a moving target. It changes week in and week out. The best team, the number 1 team, their power rating, how many points per game above average are they every single week? That's a moving target. The worst team, that's a moving target. Everything is relative. Every single game that is played that includes a team at the FBS level is going to have some impact, big or small, on every other FBS team's power rating, and to a certain extent, even the FCS, because as Tyler, now you and I are both into that space too, albeit not quite as robust or comprehensive as the FBS numbers, at least yet. I know we're both working on that. Those become interconnected. And now you've got both of these data sets talking to one another. And again, you dampen down the impact that it can have on one another, but it's all relative. People that are listening to this probably understand that. Please continue to preach that to anybody with whom you're arguing or having a conversation, because we need more people out there preaching the gospel, if you will, about power ratings.
Yeah, and that's a great point that we really can't harp on enough. I wanted to point out, like, even like, so I'm sure we're going to run into this later in the season. Even when a team is on a bye week and doesn't play, their rating is probably going to change that next week because, like Kelly said, it's all relative. It's all a moving target that's constantly adjusting. So teams that a team played early in the season, those games are still going to have an impact, like a moving impact later in the season as those teams play other teams and the data becomes more interconnected. So definitely worth pointing out. I'm sure we're going to say that a million more times, but it's super important in understanding the exercise that we're trying to accomplish here.
Let me build on that one more time, Tyler. I know you're like, dude, we got to move on. Let me build on it one more time because what you just said is very important, and we will touch on it when teams do start having off weeks. Yes, their rating could change. Their power rating rank can also change because of the movement of teams around them, as you just mentioned too. Also, guys, their most deserving ranking can change. It will change because while their resume may not have changed by adding a data point, by adding a game, the teams around them did play and they did add data points. They did win. They did lose against good competition, bad competition. I remember last year, I can't remember who it was. I had Penn State maybe in like number 7 or number 8. Well, Penn State had an off week and they moved up in my most deserving rankings by like 1 spot. And everyone was like, they didn't even play. That's Big Ten bias. How are you doing this? Yeah, because everyone knows I'm a huge Penn State fan, right? Like, that's what everyone knows about me. But like, I was like, okay, I understand. But the teams that I had, a team at least, I can't remember the exact movement, but at least a team, I think it was 2 actually, because I think 2 teams ahead of them, one of them lost outright. So, of course, they fell. The other one played a team that was like an FCS team or a very low-level team, and they barely beat them. So they actually got a little dinged in terms of a resume. So they actually fell down. And then another team jumped up above Penn State because they had a good win or something. So one team went above them, 2 teams went below them, even though one of those teams actually lost or won and went below them. People were losing their minds. And I was just like, guys, it's the same process every single week. It's rinse and repeat, but everybody has a fresh slate. Every time you start, it's like what the committee says they're supposed to do, right? In terms of everyone has a fresh slate. We're evaluating the resumes from scratch every week because opponents, their resumes are changing and that all works together. Same thing with my most deserving. While you didn't even play, I'm evaluating your resume again through a fresh lens. And as I did that, how you stacked up relative, there's that word again, to all the other teams in FBS, that changed. So, okay. Yeah. I know we have to move on, but I couldn't not do that after you brought up the good off week comment.
Yeah, no, that's super important. So let's move on to the teams that we downgraded the most. And I mean, I think just from a simply looking at the box score, looking at the final score, your number 1, Nevada here, makes a lot of sense to me because, like I said on Twitter, like they got their ass kicked by an FCS team like pretty bad. So like in my mind, they should be higher on my list, but they didn't make it for me. Kentucky was my most downgraded. They struggled pretty mightily in an FCS game. Fresno State, who I've pounded the table for here, and then here they are on my most downgraded list. Tennessee also didn't have a great showing against Austin Peay. Alabama, everybody knows what happened there. Wisconsin, Wyoming, Houston, which was by far my worst bet of the weekend. Temple, Tulane, Southern Miss, and Buffalo, who I think, if I recall, we both had Buffalo first or second in the MAC East. They are now third in the MAC East for me. Like Ohio has overtaken them, and I think I actually have Bowling Green maybe ahead of them now. So bad loss for Buffalo to FCS Fordham, I believe.
I think to be clear, I had Buffalo third in the MAC East coming in. I had Ohio and Miami of Ohio ahead of them, but I did have it as kind of a 3-team race, if I'm not mistaken. When you say Houston was the your worst bet, Tyler, do you just mean because of how that game played out, like and Houston jumping out to the huge lead and then blowing it, or do you mean like, nah, I just should never had a faith in them?
Well, Houston. So I bet Houston minus 9.5 because at the time I saw the line moving to 10. So I grabbed 9.5, and then by kickoff that had gone down to 7.5. So the line moved against me, which I don't love. It's not always a death sentence, but in this case, I mean, Rice just jumped out. Rice was up, I think, 28-0 before Houston ever.
So I misspoke. Yes, Rice jumped out to the big lead. Yeah. I'm sorry, I had that backwards.
Yeah, and it ended up going to overtime. Rice won. Houston didn't deserve to win. I didn't deserve to win my bet. That was a terrible read. So they got downgraded quite a bit here.
My bad. Yep, totally. I had it flipped in my mind that Houston had the big lead. They did not. JT Daniels at his fifth or sixth FBS school, whatever it is, he's setting a record for the number he's at. I saw that last week. He's literally played at more FBS schools than any other player, I think, in history, given the COVID year, the 1 year transfer, or the free transfer, and all the other things that are in place now that haven't been previously. You had Kentucky as your number one biggest follower. I had him as my number two. You mentioned I did have Nevada number one. And so I said the Mountain West was my big winners. Well, number one was also a Mountain West team. I guess I'm having a hard time keying in on the Mountain West this year. They played FCS Idaho. I want to talk about this for just 1 second because people are like, oh, I don't care about FCS Idaho. Well, they used to be an FBS program, by the way, till they dropped down to FCS about, I don't know, 10 years ago now, maybe. Not quite. My numbers had Idaho, FCS Idaho, on the road, favored by 3.5 points against Nevada. So I was not expecting Nevada to win. What I also was not expecting, as I look for the score here quickly, was for Nevada to lose 33-6. To FCS Idaho at home. So to me, Nevada was a huge disappointment. I dropped them 5.1 points. Again, that's a much smaller relative to last week. It's a much smaller downgrade than I had for my biggest downgrades in week one. Again, we're smoothing out as we're getting going into the season here. But Nevada now down to me to number 131 out of 133 teams. The only two teams below them, UMass just barely, and then Arkansas State, another team that shows up on my list again for the second week in a row of biggest downgrades. They are now the bottom of FBS for me. So to kind of recap my top 10 here, Nevada, my biggest downgrade at 5.1. Kentucky and Nebraska, both at 4.2. Buffalo, a team you had on there as well, down 4. East Carolina, Arkansas State, who I now mention is the my lowest power rated team in FBS. Tennessee, you talked about it, that Austin Peay game. I mean, they were losing in the second quarter. I think it was at halftime. I looked at it, I was like, what is going on at Tennessee? Well, the power ratings afterwards were not kind to them, or the inputs that we're looking at were not kind. Southern Miss down 3.6, Temple, and Western Michigan, my 10th biggest downgrade, down 3.3. So again, the scale, the degree to which we're downgrading teams, much less this week than it was previously. But that's my 10 biggest downgrades of the week. So Alabama not on that list, notice. Alabama, and I know they're on yours. Alabama was down 2.9 points, and Western Michigan number 10 at 3.3. So they missed it by about 0.4 of a point. Alabama, though, as we talked about, still power rated above Texas. They did lose their number one spot. I had Georgia coming into the year. I had Alabama after week one. I now have Georgia again with Alabama sitting in that 2 spot. So to me, Tyler, actually, maybe that's a good something to say too. My new top 5, Georgia, no surprise. Alabama, some people hated it. Others understood it. Florida State, such a big riser. They've been rising all year. Ohio State down to number 4. They're a team. They were 2, then they were 3. Now they're 4. And USC comes in at number 5 for me. I had somebody who was like, the fact you have USC not at number 1 is so disrespectful. And I responded. I literally said, I can't tell if you're being serious, ? Like, haha. Like, I was like, I can't tell if you're being serious. But on the off chance that you are, like, they've been very impressive. I've upgraded them twice now as we've gone through the season. I think number 5 is very respectable and very appropriate for where they are, given that they haven't been tested at all. Like, they haven't played anybody. They ain't played nobody, Paul. Like, that's USC, and they won't for another 3 weeks. They have a hard schedule in the second half. Once it starts with Notre Dame and then they get rolling doing that back half, they're going to get tested, and we're going to learn exactly what they're all about. And if they continue to perform at the efficiency levels that they're performing now, if they continue to do that, or even slightly lesser against the teams on that back half of the schedule, oh yeah, USC will be challenging for that number 1 spot, if not overtaking it by week 8 or 9. I mean, because the way they're playing and that offense, my number 1 offense in the country, incredible. Still have some concerns about the defense, and it's not necessarily because they haven't played well. It's because I had concerns about you coming in and you haven't played anybody that would give you a test. So it's not really their fault yet, I guess, if you want to say that. But hey, you're number 5, buddy on Twitter who thought you should be number 1. I respect your opinion. I hope you respect my model. I have you at 5.
Yeah, I've got them in the top 5 as well. They're number 4 for me, so I'll go through my top 5 as well. Georgia back to number 1. I do have Florida State number 2 now. They're 1.2 points rating points behind Georgia. Alabama at number 3, USC number 4, and Oklahoma is my number 5. But I will say my top 8, 9, 10. I mean, so from number 10, which is Penn State, to number 1, Georgia, is only 6.6 rating points. So I've got them very clustered. Michigan number 6, Ohio State number 7. Obviously going to keep an eye on that throughout the year, but man, Ohio State again. I'm sure we'll talk about this more maybe on our show next week as they go to Notre Dame next week. But Ohio State has to figure some things out. Michigan's just on cruise control right now. They've looked great, just from a power rating standpoint. Like they're just kind of boring, and that's great for them. They're boring good, and that's kind of what you want to be. But that's my top 5, top 7. Kelly, anything else jump out to you that you want to hit on before we get out of here?
Yeah, I'll just mention, since you kind of mentioned your range there, basically from my number 1 team, Georgia, down to my number 11 team, Oregon, it's a touchdown. It's a 1 touchdown on a neutral field difference. So you're talking about a 1 possession game spread wise by my numbers from 1 to 11. We have not had that, Tyler, at least by my numbers, really in the CFP era. You usually have kind of a top tier of teams, which I'd still say I do. Georgia at 1, Alabama at 2, Florida State at 3, Ohio State at 4. That's kind of my top tier. Then I have a 2-point drop, so it's not a huge drop, but it's still a little bit of drop. USC 5, Texas 6, Penn State 7, Oklahoma 8. I have Michigan at 9, actually. Notre Dame 10, and Oregon 11. But we haven't seen this kind of, if you would have looked at, okay, who's the number 1 team, and then go down 7 points. In the CFP era, we have not been anywhere near number 11. Like, it is more congested at the top. That top pack has not been able to pull away from the field as they have almost in every other year of the CFP, at least from a power rating standpoint, really at any point in the year. This isn't just like, oh, well, it's early. Yes, it is early. And yes, those teams at the top could figure it out and could start firing on all cylinders, and they could pull away. Absolutely. That's a possibility, but it is not uncommon, as I look back at my, recent years of ratings, to have a team power rated 31, 32, 33 points per game above average. Georgia's my number 1 at 27.4. Like, Georgia is 6 points, nearly a touchdown. I mean, not quite a touchdown, because it's hard to get up into that 34 or beyond range, but they're about 6 points behind where a number 1 would typically be in this, CFP era. I'm just trying to use like a recent term here, the last 10 years or so. So when your number 1 is that much farther back, your 2 through 11 don't have to be any better than they've been previously. That 1 has come back to them. So to me, that's what I'm seeing. I am intrigued that you have Michigan where you do, because my numbers actually haven't been super impressed with them. Like I said, down to number 9 after they came in here, number 4. But anyway, that's some, like I said, they're number 9. And 8, 9, 10, I'll give you this. Oklahoma, 21.1. Michigan, 21.0. Notre Dame, 21.0. That is 8, 9, 10. So from 8 to 10, they're separated by 0.1 football points per game on a neutral field. Like, you can't argue. I mean, okay, you want to put Notre Dame 8 and Oklahoma 10? Fine. Like, I'm good.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you said about the historic thing, because if I recall, I had tweeted at some point late in the summer when I was really doing like all of my historical ratings. I'm pretty sure like the average champion had a power rating of like 28.5, 29, something like that. And right now, Georgia's my number 1 at 26.7. So yeah, I mean, these teams, it really is, I think, anybody's year. Like, as we sit here going into week 3, I really don't know who I don't even know who I think is going to make the playoff, let alone win the national championship. So I like it, though. It makes for good conversation. It makes every weekend, even more fun when it doesn't feel like Georgia's a Death Star or Alabama's a Death Star that's just destined to win the championship. Like, I don't feel that way about anybody. And like we said, Texas had a great win at Alabama. I didn't watch that game and think like, man, this is just 2 awesome teams. Like, they were okay. A lot of sloppy mistakes, just fumbling the ball and, dropping passes and things like that. So
penalties,
not super crisp. Not what we've come to expect from like a championship level team. So I'm excited to see how these teams, develop throughout the year. Because as we sit here right now in September, I don't see anyone that's a clear cut number 1.
I'm with you. Florida State. You're talking about who you think makes playoff. Florida. You got number 2. I got number 3. I'm looking at the next ACC team. I got Miami at 19 and Clemson at 20. I mean, Syracuse is 22. North Carolina's 26. Louisville's 27. But you want to talk about a team that's going to be favored to be there at this point? For me, let's see. They got to go into Clemson still, and trust me, I'm going to have them as a favorite, like right now by a good margin. But if Clemson somehow flips a switch and now they play with all that talent and they get it going right, that's still going to be a tough game for Florida State because they're at Clemson. But you said, I don't even know who's going to make the CFP. I'm not disagreeing. I don't either. But Florida State, you got to kind of circle and be like, well, there's no one else in their conference that's really in their league with regard to a power rating. And that doesn't mean that's not the end all be all. We just saw Alabama go down as a two score or a double digit favorite by our numbers, and they went down by double digits. So it can happen, but you're not banking on it. So yeah, man, it's going to be exciting though. Good stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. What frustrates me as a bettor, and this doesn't apply to Kelly, he doesn't bet, but literally 3 weeks ago, you could have bet Florida State +3 in the Clemson game, and now they're going to be like a 14-point favorite. So that kind of irks me that I didn't have the foresight to do that. But nonetheless, another great weekend. Looking forward to this week. We'll be back on Thursday with our week 3 look ahead, talk about the marquee matchups, some under the radar games, and anything else that comes to mind at that point. But make sure you follow the show on YouTube at Saturday Glory. Make sure you subscribe on Spotify, wherever you find your podcasts. For Kelly Ford, I'm Tyler Shoemaker, and that was Calculated Risk.